Here we go, module 2. So you now know what debt is. Let's get into some of the major mistakes that people make. How do you get into debt? So the first thing, and you probably gathered it from the first module, is they don't pay attention to the interest rate. So if you have a 20% interest rate on a credit card, every $100 that you borrow costs you $20. That's insane. That's a lot of money. Every $10 that you borrow costs you $2. That's a lot of money. So if you're not paying attention to your interest rate, you can be throwing tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars out the window. Again, remember our example in the first module, $35,000 borrowed with a 4% interest rate versus $7,000 borrowed with a 20% interest rate. Huge difference on how much you can borrow and how much you're paying back to get out of debt. So that's the number one thing that people do. They don't pay attention to the interest rate, and that's a huge mistake. So always look at your interest rates. Okay, the second thing, people think credit cards are money. You may have thought at some point in time when you swipe that credit card that it's just money, or maybe you thought it was like a debit card. Maybe it's just going to come out of your bank account. But you have to make an effort on a credit card because it's debt, not money. You have to make an effort to make a payment on that debt. So that leads me to another mistake that people make. They only pay the minimum payment on a credit card. If you're only paying the minimum payment on a credit card, which by the way is what the credit card company wants you to do, they want you to drag out this debt as long as possible because they want you to pay the most interest as much as possible. They're not trying to give you this tiny minimum payment to make it convenient for you. They're trying to make money on you. So when you think credit cards are money and then combine that with only paying the minimum payment, you're spinning your wheels. You're putting very little money towards the debt that you owe because it's not money. You borrowed that money from the credit card company. So a huge misconception, credit cards are not money, they are debt. And then when you only pay the minimum payment, you're not paying down your debt. A lot of that payment, and you can look on your statement, it tells you how much is going towards interest and how much is going towards what you borrowed. On top of that, on credit card statements now, they have a little box or a grid that says, if you pay the minimum payment, this debt will be paid off in 9 years or whatever it tells you. Versus, and they'll give you an alternative. They'll give you an alternative payment. Like, let's say your minimum payment was $100. If you pay $500 a month, this is how quick the debt will be paid down. So, and legally they have to do that. They have to show you your different payment options, that you could pay more than the minimum payment. It's the minimum payment. You could pay off the whole balance every month if you wanted to. That's how you work credit cards. You pay off the whole balance, and that way you don't have to pay the interest payment. So again, let's recap some of the mistakes people make, and then we'll get into a few more. The first biggest mistake is that they don't look at the interest rate. The second biggest mistake is that they think credit cards are money and then they only pay the minimum payment. What's best is pay off the whole balance of the credit card every month and you won't have to pay that interest. Okay, the last mistake is that you borrow that money without having a plan of paying it back. So I just said, if you have the plan of paying that debt off every month in full, you'll never accrue more debt. You'll never be paying the credit card company tons of interest, which gets you into more trouble because you have money going out the door towards interest rather than in your pocket and going towards your debt and what you spend money on. So have a plan for how you're going to pay back this debt. Whether it's a car loan and you pay the monthly payment, have a time period when you're going to be done paying that payment. So whether it be 2 years, maybe your loan is 5 years and you want to pay it off in 2 years. Whatever the plan is, and we'll get into some specific strategies in the how to get out of debt module. But the moral is you have to have a plan. You can't just rack up debt without having a plan of how you're going to pay it down. That's how you get in trouble. And you're going to wake up one day and say, oh my goodness, I am in so much debt. How did this happen? You didn't pay attention. You didn't pay attention to the interest rate. You were probably making the lowest payment that you could, and you didn't have a plan on when you would pay it back. So that's what you need to do. You need to have it down on paper of how you're going to pay back that debt. And you will not get into debt. In the next module, we're going to assume that you're already in debt. We're going to talk about how you manage it. And then we'll get into how you get out of debt.